When my mom was dying of cancer, my boyfriend refused to pick up her pain medication from the pharmacy next to his gym because it wasn't his responsibility. My boyfriend tried to use my dying mother to teach me a lesson, so I taught him one he'll never forget. We'd been together 3 years and living together for one when my mother's cancer came back aggressive and untreatable. The doctors gave her 4 months, but she barely made it to 3. During those 3 months, I became a ghost of myself, juggling work and driving 40 minutes each way to the hospital every single day. I was drowning in medical forms and insurance calls and trying to make her comfortable while watching her fade away. I never asked my boyfriend to help until one day when I needed him to pick up her prescription on his way home from work because my car had broken down. The pharmacy was literally next to his gym where he went every day without fail. He looked up from his video game and said those 4 words that changed everything about how I saw him and our relationship and my entire future. Not my responsibility. You need to learn to be more independent. My mother died 2 weeks later, and he had the audacity to stand at her funeral acting like the supportive boyfriend while accepting condolences from my family, who had no idea he'd never once visited her or helped with anything. That night, I made my decision sitting in our apartment while he played online with his friends laughing like nothing had happened. If my problems weren't his responsibility, then it was time for his to stop being mine. I started small the next morning by not setting his alarm like I always did, because getting to work on time wasn't my responsibility. He woke up 2 hours late, frantically rushing around asking why I didn't wake him, and I just shrugged and continued drinking my coffee. Then I stopped making his breakfast and packing his lunch, which I'd done every single day since we moved in together, because feeding him wasn't my responsibility. He grabbed fast food for a week before complaining that he was gaining weight and feeling sick from all the grease. When he whined about his stomach hurting, I told him, "Your health isn't my responsibility." The laundry was next because cleaning his clothes definitely wasn't my responsibility. He ran out of clean work shirts and had to wear the same one 3 days in a row until his coworkers started making comments about the smell. Then I stopped scheduling his appointments and managing his calendar, which meant he missed his dentist appointment and got charged a no-show fee, then missed his car registration renewal and got pulled over for expired tags. He was furious about the ticket, but what could I say except that keeping track of his life wasn't my responsibility. I stopped grocery shopping for anything he liked and only bought food for myself. He'd stand in front of the empty fridge confused about where all his protein shakes and meal prep containers went. I stopped cleaning his gaming area, which became a disgusting nest of empty energy drink cans and chip bags that started attracting ants. I stopped reminding him about his mother's birthday and his brother's graduation and that important presentation he had been preparing for weeks. Each time he'd rage about how I knew these things were important, and I'd just calmly remind him that his family and his job weren't my responsibility. His friends started noticing the change because I stopped organizing our social life entirely. No more dinner parties I'd plan and cook for while he took credit. No more remembering his boys' birthdays or booking those golf tea times he loved to brag about securing. His social life crumbled within a month, and his best friend actually asked if we were having problems because I seemed checked out, which almost made me laugh, considering I'd been the only one checked in for 3 years. His friend pulled me aside at a bar and said, "You're being really cold to him lately." And I replied, "His feelings aren't my responsibility." His work started suffering because I stopped proofreading his reports and presentations like I always had. His boss pulled him aside about the decline in quality, and he came home stressed and confused about why everything was falling apart. He tried to talk to me about being a team and supporting each other, and I reminded him that when I needed him to be supportive during the hardest time of my life, he told me it wasn't his responsibility, so I was just following his lead. Things got really bad when he forgot about the huge quarterly review presentation because I stopped putting his work events in our shared calendar. He called me 15 times while I was at work panicking because he couldn't find his notes and didn't remember what time the meeting was. I didn't answer because his job wasn't my responsibility. He barely scraped through, but his boss was clearly unimpressed and mentioned something about reconsidering his promotion. He broke down completely when he realized he'd forgotten to pay rent because I always handled that, and his credit cards were maxed because I stopped tracking his spending. He actually cried asking how I could let things get so bad, and I said, "Your finances were never my responsibility. You just assumed they were." One morning, I woke up early and packed everything I owned while he slept off the 6 beers he'd had while gaming until 3 in the morning. I looked at the calendar on the wall and saw he'd agreed to have his boss and his wife over for dinner that night. He'd prepared nothing. I loaded my car with boxes and stood in our bedroom doorway watching him sleep in his filthy sheets surrounded by the chaos of his unmanaged life. The doorbell rang and I saw through the peephole. It was his boss and his boss's wife dressed for dinner, waiting for my boyfriend who was still passed out in his boxers. This was the moment when I had to choose. I could either cover for him or watch his entire life burn. I heard the doorbell ring once, then twice, then a third time with increasing urgency. Standing behind my bedroom door with my purse over my shoulder, I could picture his boss and his boss's wife standing on our doorstep in their nice clothes, probably checking their phones to make sure they had the right night, the dinner Matthias had promised them, the dinner he'd forgotten about completely. The doorbell rang again, this time followed by knocking. I slipped out of the bedroom and moved quietly through the apartment. Through the living room window, I could see his boss's Mercedes parked in our visitor spot. They'd driven 40 minutes across town for this dinner. The same 40 minutes I used to drive to see my dying mother every single day. My bags were already loaded in my car. Everything I owned, everything that mattered, packed and ready. 3 years of my life in boxes, but it had taken me less than 2 hours to pack because most of the stuff in our apartment was his. The gaming setup, the giant TV, the expensive sound system, all his. I'd been living in his life, managing his life, making his life work. The knocking got louder. "Matthias? Hello? It's David." His boss's voice carried through the door. David Chen, the man who controlled Matthias's career, standing outside our filthy apartment while Matthias slept off his hangover in his underwear. I grabbed my keys off the counter, took one last look at the disaster zone that used to be our home, and slipped out the back door that led to the parking garage. As I walked down the concrete stairs, I I heard more knocking echoing from above. They weren't giving up. David Chen was not a man who liked to be stood up. Walking through the parking garage, my footsteps echoing off the concrete walls, I heard shouting suddenly erupt from our apartment window 3 floors up. The voice was loud, angry, male. Definitely David. They must have tried the door. Matthias never locked it when he passed out gaming. His boss had just walked into our apartment and found his star employee unconscious in his boxers, surrounded by beer cans and pizza boxes, the apartment reeking of neglect and failure. What the hell is this? David's voice boomed down into the parking garage. Matthias! Matthias! Wake up! I could hear a woman's voice too. David's wife Carla, who I'd met at last year's company Christmas party. She'd complimented my dress and asked where I'd gotten my shoes. Now she was saying something about the smell, her voice high and shocked. David, we should go. This is— oh my god, look at this place. I unlocked my car and loaded my purse into the passenger seat. Through the parking garage opening, I could still hear the commotion from our apartment. Matthias must have finally woken up because I heard his voice now, confused and slurred. What? What's happening? Why are you in my apartment? We're here for dinner. David's voice cracked with fury. The dinner you scheduled. The dinner you confirmed yesterday. Instead, I find you passed out drunk at 7 p.m. on a Friday. I started my car, the engine turning over smooth and quiet. My reliable little Honda that I'd maintained myself, paid for myself, taken care of myself. As I backed out of my parking spot, David's voice carried down one more time, clear as day. This is what you call being sick? You told me you were too sick to come to work today. You're finished, Hunter. Do you hear me? You're finished. His wife Carla was saying something about the ants, about the mold on the dishes, about how no one could live like this. I could picture her standing in her elegant dress and heels, probably covering her nose with her hand, looking around at the destruction of what happened when I stopped being Matthias's unpaid life manager. I drove out of the parking garage and into the evening light. In my rearview mirror, I could see David and Carla emerging from our building's front entrance. Carla was shaking her head while David gestured angrily with his phone pressed to his ear, probably calling HR, starting the termination paperwork before he even got back to his car. My phone started buzzing in my purse, but I didn't reach for it. Something feels off about how perfectly everything fell apart for Matthias. Every single system in his life depended entirely on her. The timing of his boss showing up right as she's leaving with her car packed seems almost too convenient, like the universe arranged this perfect moment of karma. I knew it was Matthias without looking. He'd be fully awake now, the reality of what just happened sinking in through his hangover. His boss had just found him passed out drunk after he'd called in sick. His boss had just seen the squalor he'd been living in. His boss had just told him he was finished. I drove through the city as the sun set, my phone buzzing continuously. 20 minutes out, it started ringing nonstop. I pulled into a gas station to fill up my tank, something I'd always done for both our cars, and finally looked at my phone. 15 missed calls from Matthias, 3 from his mom Gail, text messages filling my screen. Where are you? What did you do? My boss was here. Please answer. This is your fault. You knew about the dinner. I deleted them all without reading the rest and put my phone on silent. 40 minutes later, I was checking into a roadside motel on the outskirts of town. Nothing fancy, just clean and quiet and mine. The desk clerk was a bored-looking kid who barely glanced up from his phone as I paid in cash and signed the register with just my name only. For the first time in 3 years, I was just me. The room was small but clean, with a bed, a TV, and a little desk by the window. I sat on the bed and finally let myself breathe, really breathe. The kind of deep breath I hadn't taken since my mom got sick, since I started drowning in responsibilities that were mine and his and everyone's, but somehow never shared. By midnight, my phone showed 47 missed calls from Matthias, 20 voicemails that I knew would range from confused to angry to desperate to furious and back again. I held down the voicemail button and deleted them all in one batch. Delete all. Confirm. Gone. Then Gail called. Matthias's mother, who'd always been polite but distant, who'd never quite approved of me but never said why. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Honey, I'm sorry to call so late, she said, her voice careful and concerned. But Matthias is here and he's very upset. He says you left, that you're gone. He's not making much sense. Do you know why he's so upset? He mentioned something about his boss. I sat on the motel bed, looking at my reflection in the dark TV screen. You should ask him, Gail. His life isn't my responsibility anymore. What do you mean? You're his girlfriend. You live together. Of course you're responsible for each other. Am I? I asked. Was he responsible for me when my mother was dying? There was a pause. Matthias said you've been cold since your mother died, that you've been distant and cruel. I actually laughed. Not a bitter laugh or an angry laugh, just genuine amusement at the story he'd spun. Did he tell you about the prescription? What prescription? When my mom was dying, my car broke down. I needed him to pick up her pain medication. The pharmacy was literally next door to his gym. He went to that gym every single day, Gail. Every single day. He drove past that pharmacy every day for 3 months while I drove 40 minutes each way to watch my mother die. The silence on the other end stretched out so long I thought she'd hung up. I asked him once, I continued. One time in 3 months, I asked him to pick up her prescription on his way home from the gym. Do you know what he said? What did he say? Her voice was very quiet now. He said it wasn't his responsibility. He said I needed to learn to be more independent. My mother was dying. I hadn't slept in weeks. I was drowning in medical bills and insurance forms, and he couldn't drive 30 seconds out of his way to pick up her pain medication because it wasn't his responsibility. That doesn't sound like him, Gail said, but her voice was uncertain now, like she was remembering things, adding them up differently. Your son isn't my responsibility, I told her. Not anymore. He made that very clear when my responsibilities didn't matter to him. Goodbye, Gail. I hung up and blocked Matthias's number on everything. Phone, email, social media, messaging apps, everything. Then I went through and changed all the streaming service passwords. Netflix, Hulu, Disney+, HBO Max, all in my name, all paid for with my credit card. He'd have to figure out his own entertainment now. The next morning, I woke up refreshed for the first time in months. No alarm to set for him, no breakfast to make, no lunch to pack, no schedule to manage, just me, getting ready for my own day at my own pace. I called our landlord landlord from the motel parking lot. Sharon had always been reasonable, and she listened as I explained the situation. I need to remove myself from the lease, I told her. I've already paid this month's rent, but going forward, it's just going to be Matthias. I'll need both of you to sign the modification, Sharon said. He'll sign it, I said. He doesn't have a choice. I'm not living there anymore, and I won't be paying anymore. If he doesn't sign it, you're still legally responsible, she warned. I understand. But Sharon, between you and me, you might want to do an inspection soon, and maybe ask him about his employment status. She was quiet for a moment. That bad? Let's just say his boss made an unexpected visit last night and didn't like what he found. I'll stop by tomorrow, she said. And honey, I'm sorry about your mother. I remember when you moved in. You mentioned she was sick. Thank you, I said, and meant it. The landlord had shown more concern than my boyfriend of 3 years. I drove to work and parked in my usual spot. Walking into the building felt different, lighter. My coworker Rebecca looked up from her desk as I passed. Hey, you okay? She asked. You look different. Good different. I'm great, I told her, and realized I meant it. Around lunch, Gail called again. I almost didn't answer, but decided to hear her out one more time. I spoke to Matthias about the dinner party, she said without preamble. He forgot he'd invited his boss over. He forgot because you usually put everything in the calendar. Is that true? Yes. And you stopped doing that? I stopped doing a lot of things after he told me my dying mother wasn't his responsibility. He's saying you sabotaged him, that you deliberately let him fail. I didn't let him do anything, I said. I just stopped preventing his failures. There's a difference. What else did you stop doing? She asked, and there was something different in her voice now. Not accusation, but curiosity. Everything. His laundry, his meals, his appointments, his bills, his shopping, his social calendar, his work reminders, his family obligations. Everything he decided wasn't his responsibility when I needed him. His boss fired him, she said quietly. Called him this morning and told him not to bother coming back. 20 minutes ago, he got an email that his security badge has been deactivated. That's not my responsibility, I said. No, she agreed. It's not. I'm starting to understand that. He's been calling you all morning from my phone since you blocked him. He wants to know why you did this to him. I didn't do anything to him. I just stopped doing everything for him. If his life falls apart without me managing it, what does that say about him? It says I failed as a mother, she said quietly. I should have taught him to take care of himself instead of expecting women to do it for him. I didn't disagree, so I just stayed silent. The prescription, she said suddenly. The one from the pharmacy. Did you ever get it? I took 3 buses, I told her. It took me 2 hours each way. My mom was in agony the entire time. She cried from the pain while I sat on those buses. And when I finally got home with her medication, Matthias was at the gym, posted a selfie about grinding and no excuses while I was on public transportation trying to get pain relief for my dying mother. I'm so sorry, she said, and her voice cracked. I'm so sorry. Your son isn't my responsibility, I said again, gentler this time. Maybe now he'll learn to be responsible for himself. I hung up and went back to work. My desk felt different without my phone buzzing constantly with reminders about Matthias's life. No texts about what was for dinner, no calls about where his things were, no messages about appointments I needed to schedule for him. Just quiet, peace, space to think about my own life for once. 3 weeks passed in that peaceful quiet before Israel called me on a random Tuesday afternoon. We'd been texting since the party where we met. Nothing serious, just casual conversation about books and restaurants and work, but this call was different. Hey, I know this is last minute, he said, but I just got out of a meeting that ran way over and I'm exhausted. We still on for dinner tonight? Yeah, of course, I said, already mentally shifting from the nice restaurant we'd planned to something more casual. Would you hate me if I suggested something different? I'm dead on my feet, but I really want to see you. What if I cook for us instead? My place is closer to your office anyway. I sat there stunned for a second. A man who was tired from work wasn't canceling our plans or suggesting I pick up takeout. He was offering to cook. That sounds perfect, I managed. His apartment was nothing fancy, but it was clean and organized. Not obsessively neat, just normal adult clean. He had actual food in his refrigerator, not just beer and condiments. While he cooked chicken and vegetables, he poured me a glass of wine and we talked about our days. You mentioned your mom passed recently, he said while stirring something that smelled amazing. When's her birthday? I'd like to remember it if that's okay. I told him the date, October 15th, and watched him pull out his phone right then and add it to his calendar, not asking me to remind him later, not making it my job to make sure he remembered, just taking responsibility for information that mattered to someone he was getting to know. My dad died 5 years ago, he said, handing me a plate that looked restaurant quality. Cancer too. Matthias needs 47 calls to figure out what one prescription pickup could have taught him. Sometimes the person doing everything stops, and suddenly you realize you can't do anything. The anniversaries are hard. We talked about grief over dinner, real conversation about real things. He did the dishes afterward without making a big deal about it, just started cleaning while we kept talking. When I offered to help, he handed me a dish towel, and we worked side by side like it was the most natural thing in the world. October 15th came 2 months later. We'd been officially dating for 6 weeks by then, taking things slow and steady. That morning, Israel texted me, thinking of you today. Want company at the cemetery, or would you rather go alone? I stared at my phone in the parking lot of the cemetery. I'd driven there alone, planning to visit Mom's grave on my lunch break like I always did. But Israel was offering something Matthias never had, the choice of support without the burden of asking for it. Company would be nice, I texted back. 20 minutes later, his car pulled up beside mine. He was carrying a small bouquet of yellow roses, my mom's favorite flowers. I'd mentioned it once, maybe twice, in passing. How did you remember? I asked as we walked toward her grave. I put it in my phone when you told me, he said simply. Important things about important people. That's what calendars are for. We stood at her grave, and he didn't try to fill the silence with empty platitudes. He just stood there with me, his hand warm in mine, while I told my mom about my promotion and my new apartment and this man who remembered things without being asked. She would have liked you, I said as we walked back to our cars. I would have liked to meet her, he said. The woman who raised someone as strong as you must have been incredible. That night, he cooked dinner again. We were falling into a pattern where we alternated cooking, though neither of us had explicitly discussed it. It just happened naturally, like real partners figure things out. 6 months after leaving Matthias, I ran into him at a gas station near my old neighborhood. I was inside paying when I saw him through the window, standing at pump 3 in a wrinkled fast food uniform. The car he was driving looked like it had seen better decades, rust eating through the wheel wells, duct tape holding the bumper on. He was counting crumpled bills, smoothing them out one by one before feeding them into the machine. $5 exactly. I watched him watch the numbers tick up, his shoulders slumped in a way I'd never seen before. This was what Matthias looked like when no one was managing his life. I stayed inside the store, pretending to browse the magazines until he finished pumping. But instead of leaving, he started walking toward the store, toward me. Our eyes met through the glass door and his face went white, then red, then white again. I turned back to the counter and asked the clerk about their car wash prices, keeping my back to the door as Matthias entered. I could feel him hovering behind me, that familiar presence that used to mean home and now meant nothing. "Can I help you?" the clerk asked someone behind me. "Pack of Marlboros," Matthias said, his voice rougher than I remembered. The red ones. He didn't smoke when we were together, said it was a nasty habit that weak people used as a crutch. But there he was, buying cigarettes with what looked like his last $10 while I stood 3 feet away pretending he didn't exist. I walked past him toward the door, keys in hand, eyes forward. He said my name, quiet and desperate, but I kept walking. In the parking lot, I heard footsteps behind me and walked faster, hitting the lock button on my key fob when I was still 10 feet from my car. "Please," he called out, "just let me say something." I got in my car, locked the doors, and started the engine. In my rearview mirror, I watched him stand there in that ugly uniform, holding his cigarettes, looking exactly like what he was. A man who'd thrown away everything good in his life because he couldn't be bothered to care about anyone but himself. 2 weeks later, a thick envelope arrived at my new apartment. The return address was Matthias's parents' house, but the handwriting was his. I recognized it from all the notes I used to leave for him, the shopping lists I'd write out, the calendar reminders I'd post on our refrigerator. I held the envelope for a long moment, feeling its weight. Whatever was inside, it was substantial. An apology, an explanation, a desperate attempt to rewrite history. I walked to the kitchen trash can and dropped it in unopened. His words, his feelings, his need to be heard, none of that was my responsibility anymore. That weekend, Gail sent me a Facebook message. I'd unfriended her months ago, but apparently she could still send messages. "Matthias is in therapy now," she wrote. "The therapist is helping him understand how much you actually did. He made a list of everything you handled and it was 3 pages long. He can't believe one person managed all that." I didn't respond. What was there to say? That I couldn't believe it either, looking back? That I'd been drowning for 3 years and he never once threw me a life preserver? That it took him losing everything to understand what he'd had? My therapist and I talked about it during our next session. Dr. Adams had been helping me process not just my mom's death, but the secondary trauma of going through it alone. "Do you feel guilty?" she asked, the same question she'd been asking for months. "No," I said, and for the first time, I really meant it. I feel nothing but relief. His life is finally as hard as mine was. Actually, no. His life is hard in a different way. I was managing 2 lives while grieving my mother. He's just managing 1 life, his own, and he can't even do that. "That's not vindictive," Dr. Adams said when I worried I sounded cruel. "That's observational. You're observing the natural consequences of his choices." Antoine messaged me the next month about something I didn't expect. "Hey, I know things are weird with you and Matthias, but thought you should know. He missed his brother's graduation. Again. Jake graduated from law school and Matthias forgot even though he's literally living at home with their parents." Gail is beside herself. I remembered Jake's undergraduate graduation 3 years ago. I'd put it in our calendar, bought a card, reminded Matthias every day for a week. We'd made it on time. Matthias had taken credit for remembering, and his family had praised him for being such a thoughtful brother. "That's sad," I replied to Antoine, because it was. Jake was a good kid who'd always been nice to me, but his brother's inability to remember important dates wasn't my problem to solve anymore. Israel and I had been together 8 months when we decided to move in together. The conversation happened naturally over breakfast one Sunday, both of us reading the paper at his kitchen table. "My lease is up in 2 months," he said, looking up from the real estate section. "Mine's month to month," I said. "Want to look for a place together?" he asked. "Something that's ours, not yours or mine, but ours?" "Yes," I said, and it was that simple. No manipulation, no assumptions, no one person making all the decisions while the other coasted along. We spent the next 3 weekends looking at apartments, and Israel made spreadsheets comparing prices and locations and amenities. He scheduled half the viewings, I scheduled the other half. When we found the perfect place, a 2-bedroom with good light and a kitchen big enough for 2 people to cook together, we both filled out the application. Both names on the lease, both credit checks, both responsible. The day we moved in, Israel showed up with a dry erase board for the kitchen. "I thought we could make a chore chart," he said, almost shyly. "Not because I think you won't do your share or anything, just so we both know what needs doing and neither of us ends up doing everything." I kissed him right there in our new kitchen, surrounded by boxes, because he understood something fundamental that Matthias never had. Partnership meant sharing the load, not dumping it all on one person. We divided everything evenly, not just chores, but emotional labor too. He called his family, I called mine. He remembered his friends' birthdays, I remembered mine. When his mother got sick that winter, he took time off work to help her, and I supported him without taking over. When my car needed repairs, he drove me to work, but I handled the mechanic and the insurance. A year after I left Matthias, almost to the day, Gail sent another message. This one was different from her usual updates about Matthias's struggles. "He's dating someone new," she wrote, "a girl from his therapy group. She's 22 and talks about how much she loves taking care of him. I want to warn her, but I know she won't listen." I didn't listen when David's mother tried to warn me 30 years ago. I looked at the girl's Facebook profile because I'm human and curious. She looked young and eager and exhausted already, posting photos of elaborate meals she'd cooked for him with captions about taking care of my man and love is putting someone else first. I felt bad for her, this girl who was about to lose lose years of her life managing someone else's. But Gail was right. She wouldn't listen to warnings. I wouldn't have listened either. Back when I thought love meant sacrifice and partnership meant one person giving while the other took. Israel found me looking at her profile and asked if I was okay. I'm great, I said, closing the laptop. Just watching history repeat itself. Want to talk about it? He asked. Not really, I said. Want to cook dinner together instead? We made pasta from scratch that night, him mixing the dough while I made the sauce, working around each other in our kitchen like dancers who knew all the steps. This was what partnership looked like. Not one person doing everything while the other claimed they were helping by existing in the same space. Matthias working fast food and driving a rust bucket while counting crumpled bills. The same guy who couldn't remember his own brother's graduation suddenly remembers to buy cigarettes with his last $10. Israel proposed 6 months later at the restaurant where we'd had our first official date. He'd planned everything perfectly, checked my work schedule to make sure I didn't have any big presentations the next day, invited my closest friends, made reservations at the right time so the lighting would be good for photos. He'd even called my jewelry designer friend secretly to find out my ring size and style preferences. I want to build a life with you, he said, down on one knee while our friends filmed and cried. A real life where we both show up for each other. I said yes, obviously. Not because he'd planned the perfect proposal, but because he'd proven every single day that he understood what partnership meant. Wedding planning was surprisingly easy because Israel actually participated. He researched venues while I looked at caterers. He handled the music while I handled the flowers. When his mother had opinions about the guest list, he dealt with her. When my aunt started drama about seating arrangements, I handled it. This is weird, my married friend Layla said when we went dress shopping. Where's the stress? Where's the groom who doesn't care about napkin colors and leaves everything to you? Dating someone who acts like an adult, I said, zipping up a dress that made me look like a mermaid. Revolutionary concept. I sent Gail a wedding invitation out of courtesy, though I knew she wouldn't come. She responded with a polite decline and a note. Matthias saw the announcement on Facebook. He spent that entire day drinking alone in his childhood bedroom. I'm happy you found someone who deserves you. The wedding went off perfectly. Everything split right down the middle like it should be. Israel handled the photographer and DJ while I managed the flowers and catering. When vendor issues came up, we each dealt with our assignments without dumping problems on each other. My new mother-in-law Carla pulled me aside during the reception while Israel was dancing with his grandmother. I heard about your previous relationship, she said, squeezing my hand. My sister went through something similar. Her ex couldn't even remember to feed himself without her doing it. It's different with Israel, I told her, watching him spin his grandmother carefully, making sure she didn't lose her balance. I know, Carla said. I raised him to be a partner, not a project. His father and I split everything too. Still do. 40 years later. She hugged me then. This warm, genuine embrace that felt like acceptance and understanding rolled into one. Thank God you knew your worth, she whispered in my ear. So many women never figure that out. The words stuck with me through our honeymoon, through settling into married life, through the quiet moments when I'd remember how different everything used to be. 2 years passed in what felt like minutes. 2 years of shared responsibilities, mutual respect, actual partnership. I'd gotten promoted twice, started leading my own team, bought a car that I chose and paid for myself. The woman who used to set Matthias's alarms felt like a character from someone else's story, someone I'd heard about once but never actually met. I was at Whole Foods on a Saturday morning, Israel at home preparing for a dinner party we were hosting together, him handling the main course while I shopped for appetizers and wine. The store was packed with weekend shoppers, couples and families loading up for the week ahead. That's when I saw them, this couple that made me stop mid-reach for a block of cheese. She looked about 25, pretty but exhausted in that bone-deep way I recognized from mirrors 3 years ago. She was pushing the cart, checking a list, grabbing items with practiced efficiency, while her boyfriend, this guy in his 30s wearing a football jersey, followed behind playing some game on his phone. The sound effects were loud enough that other shoppers were glaring. Babe, did you get my protein powder? He asked without looking up. It's not on the list, she said, already sounding defeated. I told you yesterday I was out. You didn't tell me. You mentioned it while I was on a work call and I asked you to text it to me. Whatever, just get it now. The vanilla one. Actually, check if they have chocolate too. She turned the cart around, heading back to the supplement aisle while he kept playing his game, not even offering to go get it himself. I watched her shoulders slump as she pushed the heavy cart, and I wanted to shake her. I wanted to grab her by the shoulders and tell her that his protein powder wasn't her responsibility, that his memory wasn't her job, that she was drowning and he was the weight pulling her under. But I knew she wouldn't listen. I wouldn't have listened either, back when I thought love meant anticipating someone's every need. Back when I believed that being a good girlfriend meant being a personal assistant, maid, chef, and life coach all rolled into one. She had to learn it herself, the hard way, like I did. I finished my shopping and saw them again at checkout. She was unloading the cart while he stood there scrolling through his phone. When the total came up, she pulled out her credit card without him even reaching for his wallet. The cashier asked if they wanted help out to their car, and the boyfriend said yes before she could answer, then walked ahead while she waited for the receipt. In the parking lot, I watched her load all the groceries while he sat in the passenger seat with the air conditioning running. She closed the trunk, returned the cart, got in the driver's seat. He never looked up from his phone. I sat in my car for a moment, remembering all the times I'd done exactly that. All the times I'd loaded groceries alone while Matthias waited in the car. All the times I'd paid while he assumed I would. All the times I'd driven because he was tired from gaming until 4 a.m. The ghost of that woman haunted me sometimes. The one who thought that was normal. That was love. That was just what girlfriends did. My phone buzzed with a text from Israel. Hey, I'm at the store getting flowers for tonight. Want me to grab anything else while I'm here? The contrast hit me like cold water. My husband was voluntarily going to a second store to get flowers for a dinner party we were hosting together, asking if I needed anything. Not because I asked him to go, not because I reminded him we needed flowers, but because he saw something that needed doing and did it. I texted back, maybe some of those fancy chocolates your mom likes? She mentioned loving them last time. Already grabbed them, he replied with a smiley face. Great minds. This was was partnership. This was what it looked like when both people showed up. That evening, our dinner party went off perfectly. Israel and I moved around our kitchen like we'd been doing this dance for decades, him plating his perfectly cooked salmon while I arranged the appetizers I'd bought. Our friends Layla and James arrived first, then Miguel and his new girlfriend, then Israel's cousin David with his husband. You two make this look so easy, Layla said, watching us work. Remember when you were with what's his name and you did everything yourself? Matthias, I said, refilling wine glasses. And yeah, I remember. Whatever happened to him? James asked. He kind of just disappeared from social media. Last I heard, he was living with his parents, I said, keeping my voice neutral. Working some retail job, I think. Miguel's girlfriend, who didn't know the history, asked innocently, were you together long? 3 years, I said. 3 years too long. Israel appeared at my side with perfect timing, kissing my temple. Everything okay? Perfect, I told him, meaning it. The conversation moved on to other topics. Work, vacation plans, the new restaurant downtown everyone wanted to try. But Layla pulled me aside later while the guys were debating something about football. You look happy, she said. Like, actually happy. Not pretending everything's fine happy. I am, I said. It's amazing what happens when you're with someone who acts like an adult. I still can't believe that asshole wouldn't pick up your mom's prescription, she said, shaking her head. When you told me that story, I wanted to key his car. It was the best thing that could have happened, I said, surprising myself with how much I meant it. If he'd helped just that once, I might have stayed. I might have spent my whole life managing his. Layla raised her glass. To dodged bullets. To dodged bullets, I agreed, clinking my glass against hers. Later that night, after everyone had gone home and we'd cleaned up together, Israel washing dishes while I dried and put them away, we sat on our couch with the leftover wine, just enjoying the quiet. Your friends are great, he said. I'm glad they like me. They love you, I told him. Layla especially. She says you've restored her faith in men. He laughed. The bar was pretty low after your ex. Underground, I agreed. The bar was underground. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if he'd been different? Israel asked. If he'd helped with your mom? I thought about it, really considered it for the first time in months. I'd probably still be setting his alarms, I said. Still packing his lunches, managing his calendar, living his life instead of mine. His loss, Israel said, pulling me closer. His loss, I agreed. But it wasn't about winning or losing anymore. It was about the life I'd built after walking away from someone who thought I existed to serve him. It was about the partner I'd found who understood that relationships meant both people showing up. It was about becoming someone who knew her worth and wouldn't settle for less. I thought about that woman in the grocery store, loading groceries while her boyfriend played on his phone. Somewhere out there, she was probably setting his alarm for tomorrow morning, meal prepping his lunches for the week, checking his calendar to make sure he didn't miss anything important. Israel's family understands the secret code. His mom whispers about knowing your worth, like she's passing down the recipe for a happy marriage instead of potato salad. She was drowning, just like I had been, convinced that this was what love looked like. Maybe one day something would shake her awake. Maybe he'd refuse to help when she needed him most. Maybe she'd realize that she was living his life instead of her own. Maybe she'd learn what I learned, that his life wasn't her responsibility. Or maybe she wouldn't. Maybe she'd spend years, decades even, managing someone else's existence while her own dreams gathered dust. Not everyone gets the wake-up call. Not everyone learns to walk away. I realized then that I didn't hate Matthias anymore. I nothing him. Complete indifference is the most powerful revenge of all. He was just a lesson I'd learned, a cautionary tale, a reminder of what I'd never accept again. He existed in my past like a bad dream you can barely remember the details of once you're fully awake. The last time I thought about him with any real focus was almost a year later, when Gail sent me one final Facebook message. I almost didn't open it, but curiosity won. He's getting married, she wrote, to a girl who reminds me of you from 3 years ago. She does everything for him. I tried to warn her, but she thinks I don't understand their love. I wanted you to know you were right about everything. His life wasn't your responsibility. I just wish I'd taught him that sooner. I didn't reply. There was nothing to say. Some lessons can only be learned the hard way, and Matthias would never learn his, because there would always be another woman willing to be his mother, his maid, his personal assistant, another woman who confused servitude with love. I deleted the message and went back to my life, my actual life, not someone else's that I was managing. Israel and I were planning a trip to Europe, something we'd both researched and saved for together. My team at work had just landed a huge client. I was training for a half marathon. I was living, actually living, not just existing as someone's support system. The woman who used to set Matthias's alarms was gone. In her place stood someone who understood a fundamental truth that had taken too long to learn. The only life you're responsible for is your own. And once you understand that, really understand it, you're free. One morning, Israel's alarm didn't go off. His phone had died overnight because he'd forgotten to plug it in. He woke up an hour late, panicking about a presentation he had that morning. Why didn't you wake me? He asked, rushing around our bedroom. I didn't know your alarm didn't go off, I said. I was in the shower. He stopped for a second, then laughed. Right, my alarm, my responsibility. Sorry, that was unfair. You're going to be okay? I asked. Yeah, I'll call my boss from the car, explain what happened. It's my fault for not charging my phone. He kissed me goodbye and rushed out. That evening, he came home with flowers and takeout from my favorite Thai place. For being a dick this morning, he said. I was stressed and took it out on you. You weren't a dick, I said. You asked a question and immediately recognized it was unfair. Still, he said. You're not my alarm clock. No, I agreed, accepting the pad Thai gratefully. I'm not. He set 2 alarms for the next morning and bought a charging station for his nightstand that weekend, because that's what adults do. They solve their own problems instead of making them someone else's responsibility. Thanks for letting me wonder along with you through all of this. It's been really interesting sharing these thoughts together. See you next time. Subscribe for more content like this.